You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
When World War II ended and the American deep state welded the national security establishment into place with the National Security Act, the world entered into a new era. The era of the military-industrial complex. But when the Cold War ended and the clash of civilizations became the new existential threat, the deep state found an opening for another paradigm shift. As the all-pervasive threat of terrorism became the carte blanche for total surveillance, the powers that shouldn't be found the organizing principle of our age would not be military hardware, but data itself. Welcome to the age of the information industrial complex. Of all the things that President Dwight D. Eisenhower did during his years in office, it is for a single phrase from his farewell address that he is best remembered today: the military-industrial complex.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
It is not difficult to see why these words passed so quickly into the political lexicon. Think of their explanatory power. Why did the US use inflated estimates of Russian military capabilities to justify stockpiling a nuclear arsenal that was more than sufficient to destroy the planet several times over? The military-industrial complex. Why did America send 50,000 of its own to fight and die in the jungles of Vietnam, killing untold millions of Vietnamese, not to mention Cambodians? The military-industrial complex. Why did the US use the public's fear and anger over 9/11 and a phony panic over non-existent weapons of mass destruction to justify the illegal invasion and trillion-dollar occupation of Iraq? The military-industrial complex. Why did Nobel Peace Prize laureate Obama expand the fictitious war on terror into Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia, refuse to close Guantanamo despite his earlier promises to the contrary, commit US forces to kinetic military action in Libya without so much as seeking congressional approval, and launch a new era of covert drone warfare? The military-industrial complex. Why has Trump not only continued but further expanded the US military presence in Africa, increased US aid to Israel and Saudi Arabia, actively enabled the war crimes in Yemen that have led to the largest cholera outbreak in human history, and killed more civilians in his first 6 months in office than former drone king Obama killed in his entire 8-year presidency? The military-industrial complex. When you think about it, it's rather remarkable that such a phrase was ever uttered by a president of the United States, much less a former 5-star general. Could you imagine any modern-day president talking about something like the military-industrial complex and its attempted acquisition of unwarranted influence without immediately dismissing the idea as a conspiracy theory? Over the decades, there has been much speculation about Eisenhower's use of the phrase and what precisely he was warning against. Some have argued that the phrase was prompted by Eisenhower's discovery that the Rand Corporation was grossly misrepresenting the Soviets' military capabilities to John F. Kennedy, who ended up using the Rand-invented and completely fictitious missile gap threat as a cornerstone of his 1960 presidential election campaign. Whatever the case, it is perhaps time to revisit Eisenhower's most famous speech. What Eisenhower is ultimately describing is the rise of American fascism, the merger of government and corporate power. What term can better capture the nature of early 21st century American political life? Is there any longer any doubt that the military-industrial complex has reached its ultimate expression in firms like Blackwater, aka G, aka Academy, and its military contractor brethren? Is there any other word but fascism to describe a state of affairs when a Secretary of Defense can commission a study from a private contractor to examine whether the US military should be using more private contractors, only for that same Secretary of Defense to leave office and become president of the company that conducted the study, only to leave that company to become vice president of the US and begin waging a war that relies heavily on no-bid contracts awarded to that same company based on the recommendation that it made in its original study? Yet this is precisely the case of Dick Cheney and Halliburton. It would be difficult to think of a more blatant example of the military-industrial complex fascism that Eisenhower was warning of. But as it turns out, There was another warning about fascism embedded in that farewell address that has received far less attention than the military-industrial complex formulation, perhaps because there is no catchphrase hook to describe it.
Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers.
Given that this warning came in 1961, before the age of communication satellites or personal computers or the internet, it was a remarkably prescient observation. If scientific research half a century ago was dominated by federal grants and expensive computer equipment, how much more true is that for us today, half a century later? So what is the problem with this? As Ike explained,
yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Here again, the warning is of fascism. But instead of the military-industrial fascism that dominated so much of the 20th century, he was describing here a new fascistic paradigm that was but barely visible at the time that he gave his address. A scientific technological one. Once again, the threat is that the industry that grows up around this government-sponsored activity will, just like the military-industrial complex, begin to take over and shape the actions of that same government. In this case, the warning is not one of bombs and bullets, but bits and bytes. Not tanks and fighter jets, but hard drives and routers. Today we know this new fascism by its innocuous-sounding title, Big Data, but in keeping with the spirit of Eisenhower's remarks, perhaps it would be more fitting to call it the information-industrial complex. The concept of an information-industrial complex holds equally explanatory power for our current day and age as the military-industrial complex hypothesis held in Eisenhower's time. Why is a company like Google going to such lengths to capture, track, and database all information on the planet? The information-industrial complex. Why were all major telecom providers and internet service providers mandated by federal law to hardwire in backdoor access to American intelligence agencies for the purpose of spying on all electronic communications? The information-industrial complex. Why would government after government around the world target encryption as a key threat to their national security? And why would banker after banker call for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to be banned, even as they plan to set up their own central bank-administered digital currencies? The information-industrial complex. The effects of this synthesis are more and more felt in our everyday lives. Every single day, hundreds of millions of people around the world are interfacing with Microsoft software or Apple hardware or Amazon cloud services running on chips and processors supplied by Intel or other Silicon Valley stalwarts. Google has become so ubiquitous that its very name has become a verb meaning to search for something on the internet. The 21st century version of the American dream is encapsulated in the story of Mark Zuckerberg, a typical Harvard whiz kid whose atypical rise to the status of multi-billionaire was enabled by a social networking tool by the name of Facebook that he developed. But how many people know the flip side of this coin? The one that demonstrates the pervasive government influence in shaping and directing these companies' rise to success, and the company's efforts to aid the government in collecting data on its own citizens. How many know, for instance, that Google has a publicly acknowledged relationship with the NSA? Or that a federal judge has ruled that the public does not have the right to know the details of that relationship? Or that Google Earth was originally the brainchild of Keyhole Inc., a company that was set up by the CIA's own venture capital firm, In-Q-Tel, using satellite data harvested from government Keyhole-class reconnaissance satellites? Or that the former CEO of In-Q-Tel, Gilman Louie, sat on the board of the National Venture Capital Association with Jim Breyer, head of Excel Partners, who provided $12 million of seed money for Facebook? Or that in 1999, a backdoor for NSA access was discovered in Microsoft's Windows operating system source code. Or that Apple founder Steve Jobs was granted security clearance by the Department of Defense for still undisclosed reasons while heading Pixar in 1988, as was the former head of AT&T and numerous others in the tech industry. The connections between the IT world and the government's military and intelligence apparatus run deep. In fact, the development of the IT industry is intimately intertwined with the US Air Force, the Department of Defense, and its various branches, including famously DARPA, and, of course, the CIA. A cursory glance at the history of the rise of companies like MITRE Corporation, Oracle, and other household electronics and software firms should suffice to expose the extent of these relations and the existence of what we might dub an information industrial complex. But what does this mean? What are the ramifications of such a relationship? Although the signs have been there for decades, perhaps the most startling example of what lies at the heart of this relationship has been revealed by the whistleblowers at the heart of the National Security Agency, one of the most secretive arms of the American intelligence apparatus. While Edward Snowden has received the most attention with his revelation of the PRISM program, much of the information about the NSA's ability to surveil all electronic communications has been revealed over the past decade by NSA whistleblowers like Russ Tice, William Binney, Thomas Drake, and J. Kirk Wiebe, third-party contractors like Snowden and AT&T whistleblower Mark Klein, and independent journalists like James Bamford. Together, the story they tell is of a truly Orwellian society in which all communications are being captured and analyzed by the NSA and, with the advent of facilities like the new data center in Utah, presumably stored indefinitely for use at any future time in any future investigation for any pretense by anyone with authorization to access that data. According to Snowden, this includes lowly third-party contractors like himself operating at NSA subcontractors like Booz Allen Hamilton in the vast and expanding private intelligence industry that has grown up around the information industrial complex in the exact same way as private military contractors like Blackwater formed around the military-industrial complex. In some ways, this information-industrial complex is even more insidious than its military-industrial counterpart. For all of the ills caused by the military-industrial complex, and there are many, at the very least, it required some sort of excuse to drain the American people's resources, and its failures, like the Vietnam quagmire or the debacle in Iraq, happened in the clear light of day. In the information industrial complex, where vast spying programs happen in the shadows and under the cover of national security, it takes whistleblowers and insiders willing to risk it all even to find out what is being done by these shadowy agencies and their private sector contractors. Even worse, the entire Orwellian spy grid is being run on the flimsiest of pretenses, the war on terror, that has no defined endpoint and justifies turning that spy grid inward on the American people themselves. Surely Eisenhower never envisaged the monstrosity that this information industrial complex has become, but the foresight he saw in identifying its early stages over half a century ago is remarkable. The problem is that we are even further away from heeding the warning that he delivered in that 1961 address than we were at that time.
It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society.
If only this was the rhetoric that was shaping today's debate on the issue, instead of the well-worn canard that we must strike a balance between freedom and security. Sadly, until such time that the National Security Act of 1947 is repealed, and the cover of national security is lifted from the dark actors that populate this sector, the information industrial complex is unlikely to be quashed, or even hampered, anytime soon.
You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome friends, James Corbett here with another edition of Propaganda Watch, and it has occurred to me that this series has ended up being more comedic than I initially thought that it would be, because although the subject matter we're dealing with week in and week out here is obviously of the utmost importance and seriousness, The propaganda itself tends to be absurd, in fact, self-satirizing. It's so stupid and over the top that nobody can believe it, no one can take it seriously, and it is generally worth laughing at. But this week we have an extra special treat. It's not the propaganda itself that is worth laughing at, it's the propagandists that we can laugh at, and I think that as an important extra step that we need to go to. So let's take a look at the example that I'm talking about. We're looking at Lockheed Martin, our good friends over at the Lockheed Martin Corporation, who tweeted out, innocently enough, on August 15th, "Do you have an amazing photo of one of our products? Tag us in your pic and we may feature it during our upcoming World Photo Day celebration on August 19th. Oh yes, because Lockheed Martin saying, "Don't you just love our products? Why don't you tweet us a photo of it in action?" How could that possibly misfire? Oh, that's right. Immediately. Great product! Killed 40 children! At Lockheed Martin is the best World Photo Day. Or just a picture of the blue backpacks. Or this one of my favorites here. "Dear Lockheed Martin, you asked people to tweet amazing photos of one of our products. Here it is! This is a fragment of your bomb, a laser-guided Mk-82, which Saudi Arabia used to kill 40 children in Yemen last week." Or the iconic image of the backpacks lined up like tombstones. What is this referring to? A story that was developing in the news exactly around the time that Lockheed Martin, in its infinite corporate wisdom, decided to tweet out this stupid, meaningless contest trying to pick up on the synergy around this nonsense made-up World Photo Day. Well, oh, by the way, bomb that killed 40 children in Yemen was supplied by the US, and yes, as those bastions of truth over at CNN go on to confirm, so you can't call it a conspiracy theory. Working with local Yemeni journalists and munitions experts, CNN has established that the weapon that left dozens of children dead on August 9th was a 500-pound laser-guided Mk-82 bomb made by Lockheed Martin, one of the top U.S. defense contractors. And we don't even have to confine ourselves to Yemen and Saudi Arabia. We can go many places for similarly horrifying images. We can look at the pictures of the remains that were able to be collected for this photograph with a couple of emergency responders in Gaza during the Cast Lead operation back in 2009, where Israel was bombing Gazans left, right, and center. And this is the remnants of an explosion that occurred where there were clearly marked ambulances with flashing emergency lights and paramedics wearing recognizable fluorescent vests repeatedly fired upon. In this case, on the 4th of January 2009, you had 3 emergency workers and a 12-year-old boy who was showing them where the wounded men were killed in a strike at around 3 p.m. And this is the remnants of what they were able to collect after that strike. Of course, all 4 of them dead. And what was it that killed them again? Well, it said, remnants of at least 2 Hellfire missiles, which are usually launched from helicopters. The label read, "A guided missile surface attack in the USA is cited as the weapon's country of origin." And just on a hunch here, let's just see if we can find it. This AGM-114 missile was produced by Hellfire Systems of Orlando, USA, a Lockheed Martin Boeing joint venture. And yes, you can go look up the AGM-114 that killed those emergency responders. Yes, manufactured by Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Northrop Grumman, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I'm just pointing out that it's not just about Yemen, it's many other places and activities besides, and let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees here. Yes, I mean, these are individual incidents that do tie back to Lockheed Martin. If you're going to come up with photographs that show their products in action, what were they expecting? Lockheed Martin manufactures what again? Sunshine? No rainbows? No lollipops? No. Oh, that's right. Vehicles and instruments of death and destruction. So what are you expecting? And I think the positive part of this story that we can draw out of this is that they constantly want you to feel like you are some barking, raving, mad dog lunatic just escaped from the asylum because you dare to look at this propaganda and say, the emperor isn't wearing clothes. And they say to you, no, you're crazy, you're a fringe loony conspiracist, and all your friends believe the king really is wearing a beautiful, fine, invisible robe, and you are sitting there saying, no, he's buck naked. Oh, you silly conspiracist. No, Everyone understands. Everyone sees it. Lockheed Martin can try to tweet this out, but guess what? Let's see. This is in the Wayback Machine, but if we go to the actual link and... oh yeah, it's gone. Because they immediately deleted it when they realized what they had done. So... this is another lesson that we can take out of today. If you don't know about the Wayback Machine and how, sorry Lockheed Martin, you can try to scrub things from the internet, but it ain't gonna work so easily. So you can go back and see the deleted tweets, for example, of someone like Lockheed who tries to cover up right away when they realize, oh, people aren't buying our propaganda. What'll we do? So... again, it's not the ultimate happy solution, and it's not like Lockheed Martin's going to go bankrupt because of this. No, war sells, and the governments of the world continue to buy, the U.S. and others. So, unfortunately, the war machine rolls on, but at the very least, you're not a bark-raving lunatic single fringe weirdo out there in no man's land because you dare to point this out. No, everyone sees it. They just don't want you to know that everyone sees it. So don't expect tweets like this in the future from Lockheed Martin. But you never know. These own goals do occur, and we should score as many times as we can when the empty goal is provided to us by a corporation like that. Like, for example... I'm sure attentive listeners will well remember interview 865 back in the archives, New World Next Week from April of 2014, where James Evan Pilato and I went over the MyNYPD hashtag. Hey guys, why don't you tweet about MyNYPD and how it's helped you? And, imagine that immediately backfired on the NYPD to humorous results again. If people don't remember that, please do go back in the archives. Of course, I'll include the link to that and to all of the things I've mentioned today in this edition of Propaganda Watch on CorbettReport.com. As I say, it's comedic, it's very serious, but we should be laughing at the propagandists for expecting us to swallow their garbage, for lack of a more colorful word, wholesale, as if everyone's just going to believe it. Everyone's going to praise them if they put out a campaign like that. No, and that is not the way it works, and we have to show that we know, and so that we can show others that no, this propaganda is not believed by everyone, and you are not crazy for not swallowing it. That's going to be the message for this week. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.
You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Hello friends, James Corbett here with your Propaganda Watch installment for July 31st, 2018, and I must admit, when I started this series, when I announced it last week, I did have a flicker of doubt, just for a moment, will I really be able to find Propaganda Watch-worthy type propaganda every single week in and week out? Will it really be an effective series? Well... given what I've dug up this week, I think it's pretty safe to say in this world we're living in at this time, there will be no shortage of ridiculous, off-the-charts level propaganda to dissect every single week. This week, I bring to you the news hero. The news hero, which you might notice here is NATO Stratcom COE. What on earth is the news hero?
I used to work for a gossip newspaper. One day I had a call. I've heard a story about government poisoning its citizens. I had to publish it. The people were enraged and broke into violent riots. Was it my story that created this? I'm going to tell people the truth. I rented a small office and hired an assistant. We started receiving reports from freelance journalists. Some were true, some not so much. I promised myself to never let a story go this far and report only the truth. Join me on my quest to filter the news. My secretary Bronco will help you out.
My secretary Bronco will... I am not making this up. This is not a joke. I cannot believe that they are putting something of this level of quality out with the robotic voice announcing that I am now a news journalist and I have to check the news. You can help me out at the News Hero. This is insane. This is so crazy. I had to actually check and make sure this is really NATO Stratcom COE. For those who don't know, NATO Stratcom COE, of course, NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, is not, to its credit, to its renown, is not actually part of NATO proper. It just uses the name, but it is funded and signed into existence by NATO members to help spread NATO propaganda. And from the About Us, they start with the quotation, Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. What an ominous quote from an outright propaganda organization that is there to promote the interests of NATO. And of course, that comes from the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, which should come as no surprise to those who know about the founding and origin of UNESCO, as I detailed in Why Big Oil Conquered the World. But here we go. The NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, formed in January 2014 to spread NATO propaganda and, of course, counter that malicious robotic networks and foreign influence and data exploitation by those dastardly Ruskies mostly, right? Those Russian bots. And so this is the type of thing they're coming up with now. Absolutely insane. And I mean, again, it gets crazier the more you get into this. Yes, okay, you're an editor and you have to decide if these stories are real or fake. And if they're fake news, you reject them. If they're real news, you publish them. And then you print your newspaper and you find out how good you did, I guess. And in the inline shop, you can buy a novelist, books, plants, an air conditioner. A green office is a stress-free office. Calm down your workers and increase total quality by buying plants. Yes, get the fresh air by placing some plants. I mean, this isn't even English. Get the fresh air by placing some plants. Again, for the second week in a row, I have to ask, are these propagandists speaking English, or is my English off the charts? I don't know, but anyway, this is nonsense. It's absolutely crazy. But again, very real, definitely coming from a NATO propaganda arm that is not technically part of the NATO structure, but has its own little Facebook game here that you can go and play. Oh, go to the Facebook app site to play the news hero. And there's even a site they've created to introduce you to the game and how to, what you're going to do. Absolutely crazy. But of course, as you would expect, as I would hope anyway, it is so far, as Zero Hedge reporting, a complete flop. Reaction appears to be muted is a bit of an understatement, considering it's been up for a week now, and it has 50 likes and 1 share. It has 2 reactions on Facebook that they, I guess, have allowed to keep up, and one of them is clearly sarcastic. Okay, so this is the pushback, in quotation marks, and A for effort. That's one of the reviews that have so far surfaced on this. But, it really does get crazier and crazier. Stars and Stripes, explaining the game, says that some of the scenarios that you have to judge, is this fake or true? Is Justin Timberlake really an anti-vaccination activist? Did a lady in Detroit really train a squirrel to attack her boyfriend? In the news hero, you have to decide, though a fact checker does most of the thinking for you. Exactly. This is exactly. So essentially, I haven't played the game. I don't have Facebook. I can't play the game. I'm not recommending you play the game. But if you do, I'm going to imagine you find that this is the equivalent of going to Snopes to find out whether a story is true or not, is going to be the end goal of the game. To train all the citizens to be good, thoughtless zombies who will go to the approved fact-checker sources of information to find out whether something is real or fake. If you're right, you gain virtual currency and a larger audience as reader trust grows for your news organization. If only it were so easy in the perilous real news world where profits are elusive and clickbait an ever-growing lure. Indeed. Well, anyway, I just thought I would share this with you. Absolute propaganda nonsense. Unbelievable, but not at all surprising coming from the NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence and other propaganda mouthpiece organs for the military-industrial complex, which, of course, is promoting its Russian bots are behind every bush, or is it a bush behind every Russian bot? At any rate, I'm going to leave you with that. Propaganda Watch, alive and well here on the Corbett Report. Looking forward to next week. Welcome, friends. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, with another edition of Propaganda Watch. And this week, we're going to be looking at the latest from the IPCC, specifically their special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was released to much hype and fanfare over the course of the past week. And for people who are paying attention at home, this will not be any surprise to my regular readers, because they will know that I did talk about this in my editorial shortly before I went on last week's 1-week hiatus. The IPCC prepares to release more hot air, where I talked about the report as it was as it was being prepared, as they were putting the finishing touches on it, and I told people exactly what to expect, and exactly as I predicted, yes! Oh, all the truth tellers and truth sayers over at The Real News, over at CNN. Planet has only until 2030 to stem catastrophic climate change. Experts warn. Experts. The world has just over a decade to get climate change under control, UN scientists say. Or, that, of course, coming from the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness, or in $600 million contracts between the CIA and Amazon, but hey, who's counting? And The Guardian. Oh, our good friends at The Guardian, who, of course, you will remember, won the Fake News Awards of the year at the beginning of this year for their fake news about Syria and the White Helmets. Well, here they are in 2018 with a good contender for this year's Fake News Awards. We have 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe, warns UN. And if that is a bit surprising or confusing for the Guardian's readers, well, at least you're paying attention to what the propaganda that they're pumping out, because of course we remember just last year, the world only had 3 years left to stop dangerous climate change, warn experts. And if you don't remember that story, where, of course, it was 2020 was the magical cutoff date before it suddenly became 2030 this year. Hey, we must be doing something right. If you don't remember that story, I did, of course, cover that in my video last year, UN warning just 3 years left to save the Earth, where I really hope you'll go and watch that if you haven't already. I go through all of the different examples going back to the 1980s, the UN environmental program director saying the Earth will be doomed by 2000, and Paul Ehrlich, of course, with his Earth will be doomed by 1980, and the Pachauri saying it was already too late, and Prince Charles giving the Earth 96 months, but that was about 95 months before I made this video, so only 1 month left to save the Earth. Well, now it's back to 12 years left to save the Earth, according to experts. Actually, I like how these headlines, experts warn, and then UN scientists say, and then simply warns UN. It's getting actually closer to the truth with that Guardian headline. Yeah, it is the UN that is specifically warning about this. And why do I say that? It is because, specifically, the IPCC report, here this, like all their assessment reports, but this report as well, is a political document. And I say that advisedly. I say that every time I write about the IPCC, but I still think this idea, this fundamental piece of the puzzle is not sunk in for a lot of the people out there. It is a political document, not a scientific document. And again, I say that advisedly, and we can see that from even the mainstream environmental sources that are all on board with the climate change hoax. Downtoearth.org.in reported just a couple of weeks ago about this IPCC report as it was being prepared. Countries negotiate key messages of IPCC's controversial special report, where they're talking about the parties are negotiating the text of the summary for policymakers, which is a condensed version of the key messages and findings of the main report. Now, you read that and you gloss over what that actually is telling you, and you might suspect that, oh, well, they have this scientific report, and they're just trying to negotiate over the summary, how to make the summary. No, that is not what it means. The summary is negotiated as a political document, as even mainstream environmental sources freely and readily admit. This one has been under negotiation by the diplomats at the UN, not the scientists. The diplomats are arguing over this since January of this year, and you can tell that actually they even admit it in this report, that it is the summary for policymakers, this admittedly political document, that then determines the text of the supposed scientific report that summary is supposedly summarizing. You cannot make this stuff up. But please go to changes to the underlying scientific technical assessment to ensure consistency with the approved summary for policymakers, and you can go and read through exactly how they have changed the scientific report to be in line with this admittedly political document. This is a political document. It is not a scientific document. That's one of the things that we have to highlight about this that never, ever gets talked about by anybody on either side of this issue. Assuming there's only two. There's always more than two. But what does this document actually say? What is it actually about? Well, you can go read through the document. You can go to the press release or the FAQ. Let's go to the frequently asked questions and take a look through here. where they're talking about some of the questions. Why are we talking about 1.5 degrees Celsius? Good question. How close are we to 1.5 degrees Celsius? What kind of pathways limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius? What do energy supply and demand have to do with limiting warming? Blah, blah, blah. And please do go read through it. Go and read through what the UN's IPCC is telling everyone with regards to the settled science of the 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming that we're going to try to limit the Earth to using the magical global adjustment thermostat known as carbon dioxide, which itself is utterly ludicrous and laughable, as I've detailed many times on the program. But let's look, for example, in question 1.2, how close are we to 1.5 degrees Celsius, where they admit, just in passing, and again, most people, if they even bother to read this FAQ, will just gloss over this, but they say the choice of pre-industrial reference period, i.e. they're comparing the current global average surface temperature to the temperature over a given pre-industrial period to identify how much global warming has taken place since the birth of the industrial era. And they choose 1850 to 1900, and they're talking about that. The choice of pre-industrial reference period, along with the method used to calculate global average temperature, can alter scientists' estimate of historical warming by a couple of tenths of a degree Celsius. Such differences become important in the context of a global temperature limit just half a degree above where we are now. You don't say? But provided consistent definitions are used, they do not affect our understanding of how human activity is influencing the climate. Please reread this for the heart of thinking. They are telling you that the error bars on their own admitted error bars on this already fudged data that I've talked about many times. Please go back to my rather comprehensive video on what is average global temperature to understand the fraud and how it's being perpetrated. But they admit that their error bars on this fudged data is half the size of what they are talking about in regards to this extra half degree of warming we have to go until we reach that magic 1.5. Half the size of the temperature change they're talking about. For anyone with any training in science and statistics, you will know how much garbage is being thrust down your throat. Oh yeah, half a degree Celsius. But, you know, our measurement is half of that, the error bars are half of that size. It's insanity. And this insanity just keeps going on and on and on. And they talk, for example, about they use a 30-year time span to account for effective natural variability, which can cause global temperatures to fluctuate from one year to the next. For example, 2015 and 2016 were both affected by a strong El Nino event, which amplified the underlying human-caused warming. Well, first of all, how are they separating the human-caused warming from the natural variability that they admit to? But also, the way they phrase this is that the natural variability can cause global temperatures to fluctuate from one year to the next, as if it's just random. One year it'll be hot and one year it'll be cold, and that's natural variability. But humans are making it hot every single year. Well, boo, wrong. Of course, self-evidently, obviously wrong. Look at the temperature of the planet Earth for the last 500 million years. And yes, you do see certainly this stochastic rhythm of up and down and up and down and up and down, but there are larger trends that are followed up and down and down and down and down and down and down and down. And then there's very dramatic swings in the Pleistocene. And then you get into the Holocene and you get the coming out of the past ice age, of course, we get increase in temperatures. But also, look at this ridiculous hand-drawn in MS Paint red line that we get to help show the dramatic hockey stick. Oh my god, global warming! When, of course, this does not follow the Antarctica data set that they're actually showing here. There's a definitive downward trend, and then an upward trend, and then a leveling off. But this red line that's just been crudely drawn on by MS Paint is following some non-existent trend and is up and down and then up. And of course, the up is itself a lie, as we've been over many times. Again, look at my global average temperature video, look at the other videos I've done on the subject, and inconvenient timing, the first and only ever audit of the Met Office's Hadley Center, the Climate Research Unit's HADCRUT, global average surface temperature data set, which, as my viewers will know, but probably 0.001% of the general public will know, is one of the main data temperature sets that are used to calculate this global average temperature number that they tell you is rising every single year. Hottest year ever, hottest year ever. Total crock. It's 1/100th of a degree Celsius warmer than last year, even though our error bars are 0.2 of a degree. Again, utterly scientifically meaningless nonsense that they're trying to put out there. But, oh, look at this. The first ever audit of the data in HADCRIT shows incredible absurdities that have somehow or other escaped the attention of these experts for 70 years. For example, there are cases of tropical islands recording a monthly average of 0 degrees. This is the mean of the daily highs and lows for the month. A spot in Romania spent one whole month averaging minus 45 degrees. One site in Colombia recorded 3 months of over 80 degrees Celsius. That is so incredibly hot that even the minimums there were probably hotter than the hottest day on Earth. In some cases, boats on dry land seemingly recorded ocean temperatures from as far as 100 kilometers inland. The only explanation that could make sense is that Fahrenheit temperatures were mistaken for Celsius, and for the next 70 years at the CRU, no one noticed. I will, of course, put the link into this article so you can read more about this first and only ever audit of the data under HADCRIT. Again, one of the main global temperature data sets that these climate experts are using to tell us this nonsense scare story. But this is it in a nutshell. This is what they're trying to get us to believe. But, of course, what did the media report? Oh, until 2030, we have 12 years left to save the planet. After we told you you only have 3 years left to save the planet. Whatever, who cares? It's settled science. Don't question these obvious self-contradictions. It just keeps getting stupider and stupider. But I wish it was only stupid. I wish it was only laughable nonsense that we could all say, look at that propaganda, ha ha ha. It's so obviously self-contradictory nonsense we don't even have to consider it. Unfortunately, we do have to consider it. And why is that? It's because of things like this. The UN FCCCs, if memory serves me correctly, that's the United Nations Federation of Climate Change Cultists? No, the United Nations Foundation for Climate Change Cash? Oh, I can't remember. Something like that. The UNFCCC Secretariat welcomes the IPCC's Global Warming Report of 1.5 degrees Celsius report. And again, read through this. Please do read through this. Of course they do welcome this report. Of course they do. Why? Because, of course, it fits the political agenda of the politicians who are writing these documents. The politicians who are in the driving seat of the supposedly scientific report by the IPCC. Anyway, as the UNFCC's press release admits, according to the IPCC's report, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is possible because we have that magic global thermostat. And it's, of course, it's all about carbon dioxide, one of the smallest trace gases in the atmosphere. And we can dial it down by tenths of a degree that we can't even measure, given our own admissions of our error bars. Anyway, according to the IPCC's report, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is possible, but requires unprecedented transitions in all aspects of society. If that phrase does not send a chill down the spine of everyone in the audience, then you are not paying attention to the loving arms of the United Nations and the globalists who are, so concerned about humanity. To minimize further global warming, we will need to achieve zero net emissions by mid-century. Zero net emissions. How exactly do they propose to do that? What mechanism precisely are they going to use to get the Earth down to zero net emissions? Oh, that's right. The old grey prostitute herself, the New York Times, can tell us new UN climate report says, put a high price on carbon. And what does that ultimately mean? Well, it means either carbon taxes, cap and trade, maybe a combination of the two, but something along those lines. And ultimately, we'll have rationing for the You know, once again, it's kind of funny. I think I've heard this stuff before. Where did I hear that? Let me rack my brain. Oh, that's right. I have talked about this before.
Would you live in a greener lifestyle if you could make money from it?
That may be possible if a government proposal for personal carbon emissions allowances is implemented under the scheme. Everyone in the UK would be allocated an annual carbon allowance.
Stored electronically, rather like a supermarket loyalty card, points would be deducted every time we buy or use non-renewable energy. For example, using electricity to power appliances in the home.
Or travelling somewhere by plane.
Or even buying petrol for your car on the forecourt.
Now, any points left over could then be sold back to a central bank. Are you still with us? And people who need more, like motorists who had used their allocations, could then pay for a top-up.
Carbon rationing, carbon trading, carbon taxes, cap and trade. Just as the technocrats of old envisioned a new economic order based on energy and governed by the dictates of scientists and engineers, so, too, does this modern form of technocracy envision an economic order in which energy is budgeted, priced, and traded by intergovernmental panels of scientists and the political caste that grows up around these institutions.
The Environmental Protection Agency is not a frivolous agency. It is created to, yes, to regulate carbon dioxide emissions. And I have been saying to the West Virginia Coal Association, which for the most part doesn't believe in climate science. They don't believe there's a climate problem. And I have been saying to them for a number of years that that's wrong. In my judgment, the science is true. The science is unequivocally true. And that there is a price to carbon in their future. I said this a couple of months ago. There's a price to carbon in their future.
But I believe that the cap and trade approach is the essential first step, partly because it is the only basis upon which we can envision a truly global agreement, because it's very difficult to imagine a harmonized global tax.
A carbon tax or any other way of putting a carbon price is actually, from an economic point of view, the most effective and efficient way to do this. Okay, you can regulate and you can do, all kinds of things, but nothing is as strong a market signal to the private sector as a carbon price, whether that be a carbon tax or whether it be a cap and trade, which is what California is doing, or any of the other measures that ultimately give you a carbon price. But that is the simplest, cleanest, most powerful signal. So if that's possible, I'm with you.
These measures are sold to the public as a way of penalizing the big oil interests that have spent the last century monopolizing the world's key resources and plundering the earth in the pursuit of profit. What they do not understand, because it has been deliberately obscured, is that it is these very interests that have been instrumental in creating these schemes in the first place.
It's my understanding that back in 1997, when you were vice president, Enron's CEO, Ken Lay, was involved in discussions with you at the White House about helping develop this type of policy, this trading scheme. And is that accurate? Is it inaccurate? It's been reported.
I don't know, but I met with Ken Lay, as lots of people did, before anybody knew that he was a crook.
Right, and clearly you can see why so many of us are concerned about this type of cap-and-trade energy tax that would be literally turning over this country's energy economy.
I didn't know him well enough to call him Kenny Boy.
Well, but you knew him well enough to help devise this trading scheme.
All right, once again, if you do not understand the bigger picture of what is happening here, and why it is that the literal oligarchs, literally the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the royal families and all of the mainstream institutions, all of the corporate bankster-funded establishment lapdog press institutions are 100% behind this agenda and pimping these UN reports, then please watch How and Why Big Oil Conquered the World. They are available for free on my website. But I note that as I am recording this video at this precise time, YouTube is down worldwide, and I can only imagine what might come of this incident, whatever Russian bots or whatever they're going to blame it on. At any rate, YouTube is down worldwide as I speak. So please, once again, just a reminder, even if I don't get censored off of YouTube, which I will eventually, maybe for videos like this, but at some point, I am not going to be on YouTube. How and Why Big Oil is not going to be on YouTube. You will have to have your own copy. Download it from my server for free. The bigger picture is even bigger than the $1 trillion climate scam that they're trying to run right now, which of course will generate oodles of money for certain corrupt politicians and people and corporations that are in the back pockets of the banksters. Yes, there is the monetary aspect to this, but it goes much deeper into the heart of the technocratic agenda itself by way of carbon eugenics. That's going to be one of the things that is going to try to get us into the technocratic enslavement grid. It is coming. It is coming, and you can see it clearly, the way they hype these types of UN reports, as if they are going to be the saviors of humanity. Newsflash, they're not. I'll keep drilling this point home, despite the fact that there are a lot of people out there that don't like to hear this bitter message. It is horrible, and it is hard to swallow, and it is nightmarish, but it is the truth, and I will keep telling this truth until I get deplatformed from every platform, and even then, it will still be out there. Thank you for joining us for this important edition of Propaganda Watch. Please spread this message. Available now from CorbettReport.com. Oil. The 19th century was transformed by it. The 20th century was shaped by it, and the 21st century is moving beyond it. But who gave birth to the oil industry? And what are they planning to do with that power in a post-carbon world? How and Why Big Oil Conquered the World. Watch the documentary for free at CorbettReport.com/bigoil.
You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Hello friends, James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com. Thought for the day, July 23rd, 2018. And today we're going to do something a little bit special. As you will recall, if you've seen my latest podcast on Welcome to Your Driverless Future, I mentioned at the beginning some of the ridiculous propaganda conditioning that's taking place right now to basically prepare us for the coming driverless future, the glorious driverless future. And I mentioned this Peter Returns, the future film from Kia, and I say it's a ridiculous piece of propaganda and conditioning. Well, let's go through that. Let's actually examine this piece of propaganda, because it really does bear a little bit closer scrutiny. I hope you did go and watch it, but if not, we'll watch it together here. This is a brand new advertising campaign from Kia. I'm sure it will be multiple parts or something like that, but at any rate, here we go. Kia future film, Peter Returns, and here it is. It says, with the help of Kia's future technology, Peter has defeated Captain Hook and finally brought liberation of technology in Neverland. At last, all people in Neverland can now enjoy advanced technology. What on earth are they talking about? Well, let's just watch, and I've turned the sound off because we don't need the sound. We'll just watch it together like this, not on YouTube, but on the appropriately named HookTube, so we don't give them any YouTube views. But here's Wendy and Peter, and here's a little Tink flying around. The city's a mess. Oh, there's something going wrong. There's a crisis. Seems kind of urgent. We better go save the day in our Kia. Save Neverland. Well, the car is speaking to them, and it's displaying a number of things on the screen. Look, Neverland traffic congestion at 99.8%. Oh, what's going on? Everybody's having problems. Oh, it must be Hook, the evil Hook, who, of course, has his driverless technology too. And oh, what a beautiful day for a drive. Suckers, as he goes through his little elite speed lane. And so along comes Wendy and Peter to save the day. Where are you, Captain? And notice this. Somehow or other, they have in their heads-up display, of course they're not bothering to look at the road because the car is driving itself, and in their little heads-up display, they have a map that pinpoints the location of other drivers? Well, that's creepy in and of itself, although obviously will be part of the glorious transhumanist future. Oh, a place of fortress. That's where Hook is heading. I've watched this about 10 times. I still don't know what that phrase even means. A place of fortress? Is that even English? Have I been in Japan so long I can't speak English anymore? A place of fortress. Well, let's go there in our Kia to defeat Captain Hook, save the day. Here's the privileged class-only lane, as everyone else is caught in this incredible traffic congestion, and they're zipping along in their privileged class-only lane. I understand Hook is the evil controller of this city in his place of fortress. Why are Peter and Wendy and Tink allowed to drive in that lane? I don't know. Anyway, there's this horrible congestion. No one can move anywhere because Hook is controlling the technology that could free them from this, only for the privileged. Oh, the control. See, here it is. This technology, this driverless technology, is only for the privileged, so we have to free it and let everyone have it. You want this technology, but it's being denied. It's being denied to you. So subconsciously, they're preparing you for when this rolls out, and you think, yes, finally, I can have this technology. He's in trouble. What can we do? Oh, he's calling on his Kia, his driverless Kia, to drive itself up and save the day. Wow. Well, hopefully this driverless car can come save Peter from, his certain untimely demise. He's about to die. Oh, here comes the car. What's it going to do? Oh, Wendy's getting in and send ticking sounds to Hook. And that ticking clock sound. Oh, what's that about? Oh, of course, here comes the alligator. Oh, no. Oh. And Hook flees, and they decide to go up to the control room and give this technology to the people, because apparently all they have to do is push a button, and suddenly everyone has driverless cars, and everyone can just go, and traffic is no longer a problem, because everyone's in driverless cars. And look at Hook. Oh, now he's checking out the Kia as well. He's going to get in the Kia, and he's going to see where it takes him, huh? He's just driving along, and where's it going to take him? I like this. Oh, wait, I can't drive the car. What's going on? Oh, no, it's locking the doors and taking me to prison. This is literally the advertising campaign they're running with. So if you're a bad guy like Hook, then yeah, it'll literally lock the doors and drive you to prison. But for everyone else, look, they're all in the privileged only lane now, and boundless for all. Oh, technology has been liberated, and everyone can finally, I guess, just sit there and allow the cars to drive them to wherever it wants to. Of these other things that they're pimping now. Through this advertising campaign, because again, the evil Hook is trying to keep this technology from you, and Peter and Wendy and Tink are here to save the day and give you the driverless future. Yay. So again, in case you thought I was making this up, that this is propaganda conditioning rolling out right now to prepare us for the driverless future, here it is, and it is truly insane. I suggest you go and take a look at this, and don't give them the YouTube views. Go to HookTube or some other place where you don't have to give them the views and the satisfaction of thinking that people are actually imbibing their conditioning. But it is absolutely crazy, and it's happening. This is part of the rollout. So anyways, I just thought it would be worth our while to go through some of that conditioning and break it down for what it is. This will be part of a regular, I think, ongoing series of me breaking down different propaganda pieces like this. So if you have any ideas for propaganda pieces you'd like to see broken down, Corbett Report members are invited to log into this post on the website and leave your suggestions. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.
You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.